The most important work of your life is the work you do within your soul. This is Home Improvement for the Soul.
Hello and welcome to Home Improvement for the Soul. I'm Maddie Cheers, and today we are talking laws and learning from a kid's perspective. I'm here with my niece, my grandniece actually, Harper, and I was explaining to her about how the Haudenosaunee, or what we normally call the Iroquois, used to educate their kids from 3 years old to 10 years old. You spent most of your time with your grandparents. Your grandparents were your teachers. They were the experts in all the skills that you needed. All the kids pretty much learned the same things. But aside from teaching you, the grandparents were also responsible for watching you grow up, for figuring out what your interests were, what made you happy. And this way, if you grow up to have a job that makes you happy, that you're always interested in, and you're a happy person with a purpose, then the whole community is happy. Everybody's contributing to each other. Everybody's making it a more beautiful and peaceful place to live. So that's kind of the idea behind that style of education from the grandparents and from an Iroquois, and actually many Native American people have that same tradition of the grandparents being the teachers. The grandparents who are very loving and kind, and actually for most of us, our grandparents represent that unconditional love that all of us need in our lives. And it also keeps the education and the traditions going generation after generation. The Haudenosaunee have a beautiful saying that most of us are familiar with only through the paper company, but their saying is that in whatever decision we make, we must consider how it will affect the next 7 generations. So in our world, 7 generations is 175 years. The children born 175 years from now, how does this affect them if we do this now? So I wanted to ask Harper, from your perspective, and going to school and having just finished 4th grade, when you're in school, what do you think could make life better for you?
So my teacher actually had a lot of flexible seating, but I know a lot of other teachers don't have that, so I think they should make it like something that's in a regular daily classroom.
A flexible, what does that mean? What does that mean they do?
Flexible seating is where you can choose where you sit, and there's like couches and like bouncy seats, and it's not just a seat that you sit in on a normal day.
That's a really great idea. I love that your school does that. And that's very much based on some of the more familiar progressive private schools that we talk about, Montessori and Waldorf and Sudbury. They all have situations where the children are in a position to sort of think for themselves, discover different things, and be more comfortable in a learning environment so they actually want to learn, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing I'm curious about, now this is going to blow everybody's mind. So Harper lives in Maryland. I grew up in Maryland. And when I was growing up and in school, because I'm old, I am 69. And
so true.
When I was growing up, we had 3 recesses every day. We had morning recess, we had lunch recess, and we had afternoon recess. And nowadays, there is a lot of pressure on kids to get test scores right, to get everything done by the end of the day. A lot of the way we look at curriculum is in 6 weeks blocks. You have to learn this in 6 weeks. So recess time has really been cut back. How much recess do you have in school?
I have 1 recess for 25 minutes, but my teacher this year in 4th grade let us go over a lot of the most of the time. But just saying, lunch, normally you can talk, but our lunch monitors, if we got too loud for them, they would turn the red light on and we couldn't say anything for the rest of lunch.
So how'd that make you feel?
Very mad, because in the beginning of lunch, they would turn the red light on to show how loud 5th grade was instead of us.
So that's a really very good point, because when we look at these more progressive systems of education, even when we look at back in the 20s, people were really, the 1920s, not the 2020s, but the 1920s, that long ago, education professionals, the people that were really responsible for coming up with new ways of education, like Maria Montessori and a gentleman named Adolphe Ferrier, they very much recommended going back to a more natural style of education, like I described among the Haudenosaunee, where children are allowed to discover things in nature, where they're discovering through play. And even Albert Einstein said that the best research you can do is play. So do you feel like you should be able to play some more?
Yeah.
That would be pretty good, right? It would make things more fun and more interesting.
And
Go ahead.
The only way we can have more recess is if we get enough howlers if we get 100 howlers, and then we get extra recess.
Well, at least you have some option for that. There's a little flexibility going on in your classroom, but you need 100 what?
Howlers, they're things you earn when you're being good.
Things you earn for being good. That's another interesting concept. So this is a very interesting thing to me, too, because I'll tell you something else about the Haudenosaunee. Their children never got in trouble for making a mistake learning something. So you could we'll go back to the time of when they were still living in tribes. Or they call themselves nations. They never call themselves tribes. So we'll go back to that time, right? When the grandparents were the teachers, where everybody's living in a village of longhouses with great access to nature. If a child's learning a skill like making pottery, and they're really bad at it, nobody's going to get mad at you, because there's always going to be the kids that are great at it, that can make the pottery for the village, right? The only time that a child got in trouble was for disrespect. So if you're mean to somebody, you would get a warning, and the warning usually came in the form of a story. If you are doing it a second time, you would probably get a second warning. So that would also come in the form of a story. Now, when you tell a child a story, they remember the lesson in the story, right? Better than if you just yell at them, don't do that, right? Don't you think? And the other thing that worked so well then is that it almost never got to the third time where the child, there was a consequence. Never violence. They don't treat their children with violence of any sort, not with word or deed. But there are consequences. So if you were mean to somebody a third time, you might have to end up doing their chores for 2 weeks. And considering that back then, a lot of Native American learning was playing games and making craft projects, all your friends are having fun and you're working. But do you think that would teach you never to disrespect somebody again? So it's a matter of where we place the emphasis. What are we emphasizing? Are we emphasizing learning a particular set of things, science, technology, engineering, and math? Or are we emphasizing creating a society where children can create science, technology, engineering, art, and math?
A couple kids might ask, like me, what does emphasizing mean?
It means putting your focus on just doing things, learning things, memorizing things. Ferrier's whole concept was we have replaced letting children discover who they are and discover what they want to do by making them memorize. They want to discover, we have them memorize. So that's the natural way of childhood for a human being. So if you've decided that your children have to memorize a bunch of stuff, right, then you're cutting out recess, you're not allowing them to be in situations where they can discover things for themselves, or where you as their teacher can discover, or their parent even, discover who they really are and who they really want to be.
This doesn't normally happen to me, but a couple kids in my class don't memorize as fast as like other people, so then they feel like they're not doing as good when they're stuck behind everyone else.
Thank you for pointing that out, because not everybody is the same. Not everybody can memorize things well. Not everybody reads well. Not everybody actually, very few people know that reading is not natural to the human brain. That's why we end up with people that don't read so well, because you really have to retrain your brain in order to read. Your brain usually deals with symbols. So, like if you wrote a whole sentence in emojis, everybody could read it, right? And before we invented writing, that's pretty much the way people communicated, in symbols, because that the brain can read very quickly. But once we have to teach reading, then the brain has to develop all these new neural pathways, and it works great for some people, but it doesn't work great for others, as we've discovered now that we know that kids get dyslexia. And they'll flip numbers or flip letters, or it just makes it slower for them to read. But if the school is making it seem like they're abnormal because they can't memorize something or they can't read something, then it's just like you said, Harper, then they feel bad, right?
My school doesn't normally do that. Normally we have other teachers that help them. Yeah.
Yeah. But you also have to emphasize the things they do well, right?
Yeah.
So, like me, if I were growing up in a Haudenosaunee village where there's a lot of sports played, I have no hand-eye coordination.
We can all tell that by your age.
Even when I was young, I had no hand-eye coordination.
That's not surprising.
So I was the kid who never got picked for the baseball team. So when you let the kids pick, it makes you feel really bad if you're the one that nobody wants on your team.
And at recess, a lot of kids play football, but sometimes there's an odd number. And then because the kids are picking, then sometimes that one person that might not be as good as everyone else, or might not play football as a sport but just does it for fun, then he has to be the ref, or she.
Right, exactly.
And a lot of boys think girls can't do football.
I'll bet that's true.
Yeah, so normally.
Well, and see, if you take the Haudenosaunee approach, then the grandparents always set up the teams. So they were always responsible for that. As a matter of fact, in lacrosse, the Haudenosaunee invented the game of lacrosse. So the grandparents would put on a blindfold if there's the grandfather running the game, and everybody's lacrosse stick has their name on it. You would pile all the lacrosse sticks in front of the grandpa running the game, and he would just flip the sticks side to side. And that's the team you're on for that day. And every day your team changed. So every day you have the benefit of learning to work with different people, because when you grow up, if you're a great potter and your best friend is a great hunter, you're not going to be in the same group growing up all the time. You'll have time to spend together and still have a good time together. But you got to learn to get along with a lot of people.
Yeah, and I agree on how they split up classes, but I feel like the way they do it and how they kind of separate kids from their friends, it's kind of like not as fun. Because my friend used to live right next to me, and then she moved a little bit, but we were neighbors, and we were in the same class last year. And so we would always hang out, and then once we went to different classes, somehow we just never hung out anymore because we weren't in the same class and
yeah, that's sad.
Separated.
Right. So you lose touch with people, right? And when we're looking at the idea of watching our children, not just teaching our children, but learning from them who they need to be, that kind of thing doesn't really happen. I mean, it's different if you've got two kids that are best friends and they're talking all the time and they're disrupting the class. I totally get that. But what Native people notice, and what many people like Maria Montessori and Ferrier and many other advanced thinkers in education notice, is that we're not putting enough emphasis on the kids, what is best for the kids. We're sort of often looking at what's best for adults. Do we need this kind of worker in our factory? Do we need this kind of worker for our corporations? And the whole idea that we need to find more balance in the way we educate children. And that if we let them discover who they are, then they bring those gifts and those talents to any situation, whether they're working in a corporate situation or whether they decided to become a farmer. Whatever it is, they're going to bring their best self to it, and that's what's important.
And just saying about how the grandparents teach, I feel like my grandparents are all really fun, so I would really enjoy that.
And they teach you a lot, right?
Yeah, and they know your family traditions to teach you about them.
Exactly. That's exactly the thought. And when your family is solid together, the community is more solid. And everybody has more of a connection to not only each other, but to nature and to the whole world. You start to do what Native people say. You see the entire world as related, right?
Mm-hmm. And I like, because me and my friends always say we're siblings, and so technically it started with one person. So technically everyone is siblings. So treat them like you would want to be treated.
Exactly. And I think that's important for adults to remember in working with kids. Treat them as you would want to be treated. Does a child want to be yelled at? No. Does a child want to be humiliated or separated? No. So you have to ask yourself, are there other solutions that we can be looking at as adults?
And there always is. The solution is never yelling. Because then the child's just going to get or start crying or something and get mad. And then you're going to end up both yelling.
Right. Exactly. Nobody's going to feel good. Nobody's coming out of that situation feeling good or achieving anything. Or like you said, any solution. There's not going to be any solution.
And you're not getting any farther by fighting. You're
Right.
actually going backwards.
Right, exactly. So, Harper, I want you to know that among the Haudenosaunee, children are allowed to select a law. They can create a law. They can suggest it. And in their world, the lawmakers, who are called Loyane, men of the good, they have to have a good heart and a good mind to become a lawmaker, to be chosen by their people. The clan mothers, the Yogoyane, that run the village, that choose the leaders and the lawmakers, also are called women of the good heart and a good mind. And they are obligated in that leadership position to listen to the voice of their children, because they believe in their world that children are closer to the Creator. So children, when they speak, often are in touch with the goodness that comes from the Creator, the goodness that brought all of this here. So when a child has an idea, that idea might be really, really important to the rest of us. So I'm going to ask you, what's your idea? If you could make a law about schools or education, what would you say? What would that law be?
No grades.
No grades. Why no grades?
Because you're pressured to get an A.
Ah.
And maybe you just didn't organize it correctly. Or maybe even it's not saying the teacher's fault, but maybe they just didn't teach you in the way that you learn.
Right.
So then it's not your fault if you don't know.
Exactly. And actually, there are schools, sadly, most of them private schools, but in my personal opinion, teaching in over 100 schools a year as a cultural arts instructor, there is no reason in the world why some of these curriculums from the private schools can't be taught in public school, because it really does not have anything to do with the amount of money a school spends or the amount of resources. I know that your second cousins, Zach and Simon, who are now both adults, Zach and Simon went to a private school where there were no grades. There were absolutely no grades. What the teachers did at the end of every semester was they wrote up different things about the child. How did they do in this particular subject? What was their attention? Do we think they're interested in this? So the teachers and the students had this wonderful relationship. I know that from personal experience because I went there several times to do storytelling. And there's a whole relaxed atmosphere at that school that there isn't in most public schools, I think, and in most even schools that have grades, though I have to say that in private schools where there is almost no testing, and I grew up with no testing, shock of shocks, zero testing. The only test we took, in second grade, we took an aptitude test to tell you what you should grow up and be. My aptitude test told me that I should either grow up to be an artist or a mechanic. One of those two.
I don't think the artist one was very correct.
Very funny. And maybe she's going to grow up to be an art critic. So, but actually the point is that most of us got all the way through our schooling without taking standardized tests. And now there's all this controversy about standardized tests. There's all this arguing back and forth among adults. Should we do it? Shouldn't we do it? There are the rise in homeschooling. Lots and lots of people that can afford to do it or that can make arrangements to do it are now teaching their kids at home because they're not happy with the way the curriculum is.
And like early spring, all grades starting in third grade take MCAT testing, and it's 2 weeks long, and one is math and one is ELA, and they're really annoying.
I know all standardized tests are annoying, and actually what research shows is that a standardized test only tells you how that child is going to do answering those questions on that particular day and nothing more. That's all it tells you. So, and some of us like me, my SAT scores were pretty good, not because I was great at math. My English scores, I was okay. I'm pretty good at English, but I was not very good at math. But I'm also very good at guessing.
And
so if you can guess well, you can figure out logically, well, maybe that answer should be with that answer. You can score well, and it might not have anything at all to do, again, with the stuff you're required to memorize. And for what? Why? What's the goal of that?
I know. I thought geometry, me and my friends were talking, and we thought geometry was pointless.
Well, geometry might be pointless for you. That's the point. It might be pointless for you, but it might be fantastic for somebody else. For me personally, that was the only math I loved. I loved geometry. I got geometry because it's so beautiful. I also didn't take geometry in fourth grade. I took geometry in high school. So a lot of what happens with kids in school has to do with the expectations of adults, right?
And I'm not saying my teacher was bad at all. She was my favorite teacher ever. And we would just play this one YouTube video called Bunny Hop, and we would just take a break for like 20 minutes and play it over and over and over again. She would tape, one time I said I was stuck, and she taped me to a table, and then I said I was confused, and she wrote on a sticky note and sticked it on my forehead. Then she said my name was confused. And then she started handing out sticky balls. She was really fun. But then again, not all teachers are like that.
Right. And that is part of the problem. So the other thing that I know from working in all these schools for all these years is talking to teachers who have resigned. Wonderful teachers. Teachers I started out with 25 years ago when they did have more freedom to create their own curriculum and teach it in their own time, when they weren't so restricted. So doing this very restricted learning, this very forced style of education with 6 weeks to learn, 45-minute segments of the day to learn in, doing that doesn't give freedom and creativity to anybody, not to the student and not to the child, neither one. So maybe it's time for us to rethink the way we're doing things, right?
Right.
So Harper, thank you. You're going to be back for our second session when Amalia Drews will be joining us. Wonderful, magnificent artist and art teacher. So thank you everybody for listening. It's been a real pleasure, my lovely grandniece, to have you here with us today. And for those of you out there, I would suggest that starting today, talk to your kids about what's going on in school. Have them write something for you. Or just sit down and chat about it. Just figure out how are they really feeling. Let them know that you're concerned. Let them know that you care. And I know lots and lots of parents out there try to let their kids know that they care. I know lots and lots of parents out there are very, very, very busy today. And sometimes don't have enough time. But if you can find 5 minutes to just sit down and have a conversation like Harper and I just had, you're going to learn some pretty amazing things. So today's poem actually came with a title. Some do, some don't. This one is called Heart's Embrace. Love and life and truth, the endless seeking of our youth, turns into songs of heartfelt glee, turns into roads that kiss the sea. The knowingness that comes of age is how we free the inner sage, embracing childhood fantasy. We find that we can truly see the light that bursts from every branch, the soul that starts the avalanche of beauty song and heart's embrace. We see we are the place of grace, a grace that whispers in the night, a grace that gives us truest sight, to hold beyond the world we see, into a place where all are free, to sing the song that heralds change, to bring about and rearrange the particles that all things are, this life that's gifted by a star, this soul that cannot help but love, instructions coming from above. Into this land we sing the truth, into this space we bring our youth. This chaos that you so much fear is just the sound you need to hear. This lightning bolt, this thunder crack is what we need to bring us back into the love and light we knew, beyond the soul of me and you. Have a beautiful, wonderful, grateful week, and I'll see you back here next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us for Home Improvement for the Soul. If you'd like more information, please go to womensoneness.com or maddiecheers.com. That's womensoneness.com or maddiecheers.com. See you on the next episode.